Welcome to Veritas. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss our latest episodes. Please like this video, comment below with your thoughts, and share it with others seeking truth. For more exclusive content and to support our mission, visit Veritas7.com.
The questions you always had. The answers you were never given. The place to seek the truth. Welcome to Veritas.
Tonight on Veritas, our special guest is Professor Avi Loeb, Harvard astrophysicist and visionary thinker whose bold ideas have ignited debate and curiosity around the world. Known for challenging conventional wisdom and asking questions most scientists avoid, Dr. Loeb now turns his attention to an extraordinary visitor from deep space, the interstellar object 3I Atlas, currently racing toward our solar system at 60 kilometers per second. This Manhattan-sized enigma is unlike anything we have ever seen. Arriving from the direction of the Milky Way center, it carries only a 0.005% chance of being a natural object, according to Loeb's calculations. If he is correct, then we are not simply looking at a chunk of rock from another star system. We may be watching an artificial craft, perhaps a probe, on a deliberate journey toward our cosmic neighborhood. Its closest approach is expected in November, which raises the questions that have electrified scientists and captivated the public. If this is a visitor from another civilization, do they come in peace? What is their purpose? And why now? Since its discovery, 3I Atlas has fueled urgent investigation. Astronomers are racing to capture every bit of data before it disappears into interstellar darkness. And while most focus on the science, an unverified online claim has added a strange twist that a signal was received in Chile and decoded with the help of artificial intelligence. Its authenticity is unproven, but its mere existence shows how quickly mystery can ignite the imagination. Tonight we will explore the science, the speculation, the implications for humanity, and the very real question of whether we are prepared for whatever 3I Atlas may bring. By the end of this conversation, you will have a front row seat to one of the most remarkable and perhaps defining moments in human history. Professor Avi Loeb is coming up next. Welcome to Veritas. If this is your first time listening, welcome home. To access tonight's full interview and all of our exclusive material, simply join the Veritas Plus family by clicking on the subscribe button at Veritas7.com. While you're there, don't forget to visit the Veritas store, featuring a range of great products, including Focus Life Force Energy. Experience the benefits with a 15-day free trial of FLFE, no credit card required. Also, be sure to explore our enhanced Veritas Plus transcripts, offering full transcripts, comprehensive analysis, and exclusive insights for every episode. As a Veritas Plus member, you'll receive a 50% discount on these enhanced transcripts. Want to get in touch? Be a guest on the program? Suggest someone or share feedback? Just click the contact button at Veritas7.com. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's program. His website is avi-loeb.medium.com. Joining us from Cambridge, Massachusetts, is Professor Avi Loeb of Harvard University. Hello, Professor. Welcome to Veritas. It's an honor. How are you?
Thanks for hosting me. Actually, Veritas does represent Harvard University, as you may know.
I know. You see that word probably around the walls of your institution every so often.
That's true. Yes. And of course, it underlines a very important principle of seeking the truth.
Exactly. So I know your schedule must be packed, so I really appreciate your making time for this conversation. But before we get into the questions, is there anything you've been especially wanting to share lately that you feel isn't getting enough attention?
No, I'm getting too much attention. I actually don't have time for anything other than basic sleep hours, and that's it. And then after that, I have interviews. I had over the past 24 hours, I had 10 interviews, including podcasts, and I'm trying to write up essays and scientific papers. So I'm working nonstop, and everything appears. And I had the 200,000 readers of my essays on medium.com over the past 10 days. And so that's a very huge crowd, given that these are not tweets. These are several pages long, each of them.
Well, let's dive deep. Some discoveries begin quietly, Professor, almost unnoticed, until the data forces us to look closer. When you first saw the details on 3I Atlas, what stood out to you above everything else?
Its brightness. It was very bright for its distance. It was detected by a 0.5 meter telescope in Chile called Atlas, and it was at a distance of 4.5 times the Earth-Sun separation. So I immediately calculated that, in fact, it needs to be, if it's a solid object, needs to be 20 kilometers in diameter. And this is a giant rock, twice as big as the rock that killed the non-avian dinosaur 66 million years ago. I calculated that such a big rock carries so much rocky material that it can arrive to our neighborhood only once per 10,000 years from interstellar space. And we have detected it over the past decade, observing the skies. So something doesn't make sense here. I wrote a paper about it. I said, well, actually, also, we have seen previous interstellar objects. Oumuamua was the first one in 2017, and Borisov was the second one in 2019. And they're both at the scale of hundreds of meters, which is 20 times smaller than 3I Atlas. And why would we see small rocks and then suddenly a giant rock? There are many more small rocks for each giant rock. Especially in the solar system, there are hundreds of thousands of small rocks of 100 meters in size compared to a 20-kilometer rock. And so we haven't seen hundreds of thousands of Oumuamuas or Borisovs before we saw this one. So something is not working out. And of course, one simple solution would be to say it's a small rock, but that is surrounded by a cloud of dust. And that's what reflects the sunlight. The only problem is, in such a case, you would expect a very nice cometary tail behind it. We don't see it. The deepest image from the Hubble Space Telescope shows some glow in front of the object on a relatively small scale, compared to the comet Borisov, which was the previous interstellar object, where we saw a beautiful cometary tail giant glow around the object. This one is more compact. The glow is maybe 100 times smaller than Borisov, barely noticeable in images from ground-based telescopes, and it's in front of the object. And so the only way to make sense of it is if the glow represents dust particles that are big enough not to be pushed by the solar wind or solar radiation. And I did a simple calculation that to maintain this glow over 6 months takes only a surface layer that is less than a millimeter in size across a 20-kilometer object. So it could be just dirt. It could be just broken fragments from the surface of a solid body that were released as a result of the illumination by the sun. But it's not a comet. We don't see any evidence for gas in the form of molecules or atoms that we recognize, carbon-based molecules that often appear for comets. So the question is, what is it? And how is it possible that we see a big object like that? The spectroscopy of the object identified the red color, that it reflects mostly red light, and that could be the result of the surface of the object being red, because we don't see small dust particles trailing behind the object. We don't see a cometary tail. And so one would say, okay, well, if it's not, it has nothing to do with the rocky reservoir in interstellar space, maybe it's an object that was targeting the inner solar system, and then it has nothing to do with that reservoir. And indeed, the trajectory of this object is very fine-tuned. It lies within the plane of the planets around the sun, to within 5 degrees. That's roughly the way this plane is defined, because the planets are not perfectly in the same plane. And the chance of that happening at random, that an object will come from interstellar space and be in that plane, is 1 in 500. So it's a very small probability. Yet this one is. And of course, the benefit of being in the plane is it can pass close to many planets along its path. And it does. It actually, the timing of its arrival is perfectly tuned such that it will pass close to Mars, Venus, and then Jupiter. And the chance of that happening, that it will pass so close to all these planets, is 1 in 20,000. And so here is again a very small number. And the other coincidence is that it comes closest to the sun when we can't observe it from Earth, because the sun will be in between us and this object. And the point of closest approach to the sun is very special, because for spacecraft, that's the best place to maneuver. By activating your engine, you can take advantage of the gravitational assist from the sun. We do that with spacecraft, and this object might be planning to do that, or to send mini probes that would visit the planets. It comes in a retrograde orbit that is opposite to the motion of the planets around the sun, and therefore if it lives around mini probes, they can easily collide or engage with planets, because the planet moves towards them and they move towards the planet. And so, it also comes at a very high speed, higher than all the previous interstellar objects, at 60 kilometers per second, far out. And currently we can't reach it from Earth with our rockets, because it moves too fast. And the only chance of actually intercepting it, I realized, is to use a spacecraft that is currently in orbit around Jupiter. It's called Juno, and it was supposed to be actually eliminated in mid-September 2025 by crashing it into Jupiter. That was the plan. The end of the mission. It started in 2011. And I suggested in a paper that I wrote a couple of weeks ago that, in fact, maybe we should give it a push away from Jupiter so that it will intercept the path of 3I Atlas, the new object, as it comes close to Jupiter in mid-March 2026. And a day later, I got a phone call from a Congresswoman, Anna Paulina Luna, who was very excited about the idea. She asked me for a summary of the status of 3I Atlas, an overview, and then she wrote a letter to the head of NASA, Duffy, encouraging NASA to look into the possibility of using Juno as a probe by extending the mission at least by 6 months, so that it will give us more information from a close passage near 3I Atlas, using all of its instruments, something that could give us information that we can't get from afar, from Earth.
It seems that Congresswoman Luna is at the forefront of wanting disclosure, really getting closer to the truth in comparison to others. But for those hearing about it for the first time, how do we define 3I Atlas and confirm that it did not originate in our own solar system?
Oh, that's very easy. It moves at such a high speed that the sun's gravity cannot bind it. If you look at its expected trajectory, it's close to a straight line. So the sun barely bends it, and that should be compared with slower objects, including even the interstellar object Oumuamua, which was nearly at rest relative to the local frame of the Milky Way galaxy when it entered the solar system. So it was relatively slow, and then the solar system bumped into it, and when it came close to the sun, the trajectory was deflected quite significantly. It changed direction. In this case of 3I Atlas, it's moving so fast that the sun just slightly bends the trajectory, but not much. Only when it comes close to the sun, you can see a bend. But it's definitely not bound to the sun because it's moving so fast, and it came into the solar system from outside.
You have calculated that there's only, correct me if I'm wrong, a 0.005% chance this object is natural. How do you arrive at that number? And what does it mean for the way we interpret its presence here?
Yeah, so this is the probability, the one that you mentioned, the probability of it passing so close to Mars, Venus, and Jupiter. It's 1 in 20,000. And for that, we just took the trajectory that it has and randomly allowed for the arrival time to be any value. So in other words, if you don't even ask the question of why is it aligned with the plane, the ecliptic lane of the planets, you just forget about that. You say, okay, let's adapt this trajectory. And the only thing we change is the arrival time. Then only 1 out of 20,000 arrival times will bring it as close as it does come to.
Want the full story? This is just part 1. Now offering video interviews and discounted transcripts for members. Become a Veritas Plus member today at veritas7.com.
To these 3 planets. And that means that there might have been some thought given to the trajectory so as to maximize the amount of information it can get from these various planets, or perhaps to deposit some mini probes into them. And I had a meeting with the Galileo project research team today. That's the project I'm leading. And we are building multiple observatories to monitor the sky for objects within the Earth's atmosphere. And we are analyzing the data with machine learning software. And I suggested to one of the team members today that following the perihelion of 3I Atlas, the time when it comes closest to the sun, which is October 29th, 2025, that we would monitor whether there are any unusual events here on Earth. You know, if it were to release some mini probes, we might see enhanced activity of some anomalous nature in November, December, or maybe January next year. It will take a few months for any such probe to intercept the Earth. But you know, in blind dates with interstellar objects, I think we should observe them rather than have an opinion to start with. And the mistake by comet experts is to assume that everything we see in the sky must be a rock or an icy rock. And, you know, if you just go back a little bit in history, before 1803, it was thought that no rocks can fall from the sky. That, you know, there was a suggestion a few years earlier, about a decade earlier, by a German physicist that perhaps meteorites are rocks that originate in outer space based on the evidence. But that was dismissed and ridiculed by the scientific community until a meteor shower occurred in Liège, France, that was reported about by a lot of people, and there were 1,000 fragments that fell from the sky. And a French physicist, Bayot, studied it and reported back that this is real, that there are rocks in outer space. And at that point, the scientific community accepted that as the paradigm. But now, you know, when I say, okay, well, since 1803, you know, we should actually be mindful of the fact that in 1957, Sputnik 1 was launched to space, and following that, there were lots of technological objects that we launched to space, and they were added to the rocks in the solar system. And so since we did that, and there might be cosmic neighbors that did the same, we should allow for the possibility of objects entering the solar system that are technological, because we are currently producing such things in space. And somehow the comet expert community is refusing to allow for that. Now, I say this is paradoxical because every now and then they make a big mistake. Like, for example, the telescope Pan-STARRS that discovered the first interstellar object, Oumuamua, you know, it discovered this object. This object was behaving in ways we don't expect. It was most likely flat, as it was pushed away from the sun without showing any cometary evaporation. And the push was consistent with radiation pressure, that force that declines inversely with distance squared from the sun. But so I said, well, you know, this is not a comet. It may well be a technological object pushed by reflecting sunlight. And then 3 years later, the same telescope discovered such an object. And then it was realized, yeah, this one is actually a Centaur upper stage. It was given the name 2020 SO, discovered in August 2020. It was given, and it was just a launch by NASA from 1966. So here is an object that was technologically produced that behaved just like Oumuamua. And then, on January 2nd, 2025, this year, there was a near-Earth object that was cataloged by the Minor Planet Center as an asteroid, a near-Earth asteroid, a rock. And a day later, they realized, this one actually moves along the path of the Tesla Roadster car that SpaceX launched in 2018. So then they immediately removed it from the near-Earth objects catalog. They said, this is not a rock, it's a car. And the only reason they know that is because SpaceX launched this car, so we know what we did. But how about someone else that launched an interstellar car? We would argue that must be a rock of a type that we've never seen before, and we should allow for that as part of our narrative. But the comet expert community is extremely hostile, and they immediately catalog 3I Atlas as a comet. They insist that it's a comet. They ridicule any discussion that is different from that interpretation. And I find that anti-scientific, because we should attend to the data, be curious about it, and collect more data to figure it out.
Galileo Galilei once brought astronomy into the modern age. I think this is why you created the Galileo Project, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence into the mainstream of science because of Oumuamua. How do you compare these three objects, Oumuamua, Borisov, and 3I Atlas?
Right. So actually, my connection to Galileo Galilei runs back about 14 years or so. I was invited to have a distinguished professorship with a lectureship in Pisa, where Galileo worked. It was, the Italians call it Cattedra Galileana, of the most prestigious academic institution in Italy. It's called the Scuola Normale Superiore. And I gave a series of lectures in 2011 there. And that was the beginning of my link to Galileo Galilei. And not to speak about the fact that his name is drawn from Galilee, the northern part of Israel, where I was born. And so at any event, that's why, his experience suggesting that based on data from his telescope, it looks as if the Earth is not at the center of the universe. That to me is a symbol of how science should be done, attending to evidence through telescopes. Now, the Vatican didn't like this report, and he was put in house arrest. And that makes no sense to me. If they wanted to show that he's wrong, they should have looked through telescopes and just to disprove him, and then they would realize that he's right based on their own data. But instead, they refused to look through his telescope, and they put him in house arrest. And now what good did it do? The Earth moved around the sun for 4.6 billion years before the Vatican even existed. So if there is a physical reality in which the Earth is not at the center of the universe, it wouldn't really matter what they do to Galileo. Poor Galileo, he was put in house arrest. But it's completely irrelevant to whether the Earth moves around the sun or is at the center of the universe. To figure out the truth, you really need to look for the evidence. And, they would have saved themselves from an embarrassment, because in 1992, they admitted that Galileo was right. And that was 350 years after he died. So they mistreated him. Then they embarrassed themselves, admitting that they were wrong. Why go through that? Just look for the data to start with. And then you maintain your credibility. But that tendency is not just of the Vatican. It's obviously true also for the scientific establishment today. That the experts are building their reputation on past knowledge and resisting anomalies. They would much rather shove them under the carpet of conventional thinking. I have a very simple criterion of distinguishing between dogmatists and genuine scientists. You give both of them a lot of data. The dogmatists would be really upset because the data might actually contradict their dogma, their prejudice. A genuine scientist would be delighted, even if it contradicts what the scientists thought before. The way to think of science is as a learning experience. We should be modest, humble. We don't know much. And so when nature gives us more information about the way it operates, we should accept it with open arms. And even if it proves us wrong, that's the way basically, that's a mark of intelligence. The ability to learn is a mark of intelligence. The persistence of experts to dismiss anomalies and to bully and ridicule whoever suggests that there is something wrong with a dogma, that is not a sign of intelligence. That's actually anti-science sentiment. And so what I find really surprising is within science, you have people who contradict the heritage, the legacy of Galileo, which is to pay attention to evidence and be humble and not pretend that we know the answer in advance. Instead, what they do is come together in a group of similar-minded people and attack any individual that deviates from the beaten path. And of course, they have more power, so they can go to social media and ridicule that person. They can block the publication of papers by that person. I mean, that's the modern equivalent to putting Galileo in house arrest, and it still happens. That's what I'm saying. And how can we save science from those people? The best way to do it is to stand up to them and say, look, you are violating the principles of Galileo. Let's just look at the data in an agnostic fashion and discuss the discrepancies, okay? If you have an answer to how the discrepancy can come about, like if you can say, okay, no, it's not 1 in 500 chance, it's not 1 in 20,000 chance, or you say, okay, a miracle of 1 in 20,000 times 1 in 500 could happen, and it's just an icy rock, then prove your point, okay? Don't just say, I see some glow around the object, it must be a comet, because you have to notice that the glow is in front of the object, it's not behind. And you see all these people that keep saying it's a comet based on the image, but they forget that the glow is in front of the object, not behind it. So what is it? And they don't even do a simple calculation to realize that it's a very small amount of matter that could be just dirt coming from a solid object. And instead of talking about the details, they just say, believe the experts. They work really hard. We shouldn't really embarrass them. And let's move on. And that is not the way to realize that we are wrong or that our past knowledge is incomplete. And in this case, we are talking about the first objects that came from outside the solar system. So it's just like seeing objects come from the street into your backyard. And you might as well argue that since your backyard is full of rocks, all the objects that come from the street must be rocks. That would be the zeroth order assumption. But as long as you make it just a hypothesis that can be tested, because every now and then you will find a tennis ball thrown by a neighbor. And if you keep arguing that it's not a tennis ball, it's a rock, just shaped in a weird way, then you will miss the point. Just think about the cave dweller finding a cell phone. The cave dweller would argue, this is a rock of a type that I've never seen before. However, if the cave dweller has a kid, the kid might look at this cell phone and realize that by pressing a button, one can get information that is quite miraculous and realize it's not a rock. And so I'm trying to play that role of a kid, basically being curious. And, it's really strange because I'm much older than many of these young zealots that ridicule discussing alternatives to the standard interpretation. They were born when I started doing astrophysics. And they lecture me about what to do. And you have also people who are not practicing science at all and putting videos on YouTube that are criticizing my work. And, just over the past month, I wrote about 10 scientific papers. So I'm in the trenches doing the science, and they haven't published a single scientific paper over the past decade. And yet they feel they have a privilege of criticizing me as if, I'm a threat to science when they don't even do science. How dare they?
I really, really respect what you just said, the candor that you're admitting that science today behaves almost like dogma. And let me just add a parenthesis here, since you mentioned the Vatican. As you know, they did a move. They established a telescope in Arizona after Castel Gandolfo had too much light pollution. This is dogma. This is religion. This is the Catholic Church. Why are they so interested in space?
You mean the church?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's part of the universe, and I don't blame them for that. I would argue that the frontiers of science in space represent, are exploring the unknown, which is very much part of spirituality. And to me, science is not a contradiction to religion. I think science actually...
17 seasons of uncensored interviews. While you're hearing part 1 with ads, Veritas Plus members get part 2 immediately, plus video interviews and discounted transcripts. Become a Veritas Plus member today at veritas7.com.
Really helps religious beliefs if you approach it correctly, because the best practice of love to someone is to try and learn as much as possible about the subject of the love. That is the sincerest form of love, when you want to know everything possible about your subject. And if your love is to God, and the universe you believe was created by God, you would like to know as much as possible about the universe, because that will allow you to appreciate the work of God. And therefore, that's exactly what science is doing, studying the details, trying to make sense of them, and appreciating the richness of the universe. So I would argue that science is actually a tool that can help people appreciate, have more awe at how subtle the universe is and how detailed it is. I don't think it's in contradiction. The contradiction comes when religion is trying to tell us what the physical reality might be like the earth is at the center of the universe. Well, guess what? It's not. Okay, we can see the earth from a distance and it moves around the sun. We see that from spacecraft. So don't make statements about the physical reality that are not substantiated by evidence. But as long as, it's the fundamental principles of religion, believing in a superhuman entity, that created the universe, I think that science can only help that kind of a belief if you approach it correctly, if you're not trying to replace science by bold statements about how the universe operates. We now know a lot about the universe. We know when the Big Bang took place based on data, and we see how structure formed in the universe. We have sort of a picture of how galaxies like the Milky Way came about, in which stars like the sun formed, next to which planets like the Earth formed. And so we have sort of a good sense of what happened. And I think people who want to appreciate the universe should study that.
So the object's trajectory points back toward the center of the Milky Way. From a scientific perspective, what could that point of origin indicate?
So with a student of mine, we integrated the trajectory of 3I Atlas back in time. And since it moves at high speed, it must have come from a relatively thick disk of stars around the Milky Way plane. So the Milky Way is a disk galaxy. I mean, the stars are organized in a disk-like configuration, but over time they get scattered around. And so young stars are confined to the thin disk. Old stars populate a thicker disk. And this object must have originated from the thick disk based on our calculation. We estimate perhaps it came from a star that is about 10 billion years old. And that's very different from Oumuamua, for example, that because it was moving slower, came from the thin disk of the galaxy that is characterized by stars with an age of 1 to 2 billion years, younger than the sun. So the sun is in between. And Borisov, the second interstellar object, came from a population that is roughly the age of the sun. And just to compare the three objects we know about from interstellar space, Oumuamua, I mentioned before, it was about 100 meters in size, the size of a football field, had a disc-like shape that we deduced based on its brightness changing by a factor of 10 as it was tumbling every 8 hours. And it was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force without showing any evidence for cometary material around it. And then Borisov was discovered, and that one looked just like a comet. There were molecules of carbon-based molecules around it that we often see around comets. And so it was definitely a comet. Now comes 3I Atlas that was discovered on July 1st, 2025. And that one has completely different anomalies in terms of its trajectory being fine-tuned, its size being huge, 20 kilometers if it's a solid object. And we still have to figure it out. We have an opportunity to do that. As it approaches the sun, it will get brighter. And if it's a comet, it will erupt. There will be outgassing. There will be a beautiful cometary tail around it. So we just need to wait and watch the movie as it unfolds. But if it does a maneuver near the sun on October, at the end of October 2025, the stock market may crash. If it happens to be a technological object. And a month ago, I proposed a new scale for interstellar objects that is called the Loeb scale, after my last name, where 0 indicates a natural object, that we are absolutely confident that it's either a comet or an asteroid, a rock, based on all the characteristics that it shows. And 10 means a definitely technological object because we see it maneuvering. We imply that it has an engine, some propulsion system. It perhaps shows some artificial lights or broadcasts some signals. These are the telltale signatures of a functioning device. And if we find those, we will give it a rank of 10. As of now, given the anomalies of 3I Atlas, I give it a rank of 4. But as time goes on, this rank will change because science is a learning experience. So as I get more data, I may either rank it closer to 0 or closer to 10. And my point is that if it gets close to 10, then we have to decide how to respond to it. In the past, we searched for radio signal. That was the whole program of SETI since the 1960, when Frank Drake established the first search, and we haven't found any radio signal from another civilization. It's waiting for a radio signal is just like waiting for a phone call. You may not get it when you're waiting, but there is another approach, which is to look for a package in your mailbox. That's a very different approach because, the package may be there in your mailbox if it arrived a long time ago, and it doesn't require the sender to be alive in the way that a phone call requires. And so we only, over the past 8 years or so, we discovered those interstellar objects that represent packages from far away. And, we see a lot of systems that resemble the Earth-Sun system. With the same separation, we expect billions of Earth-Sun analogs. And that is just within the Milky Way galaxy. And that is just like seeing a lot of houses, like our own home, on the cosmic street. And my colleagues argue, well, there are all these houses, but maybe they don't have any residents, like us. Maybe they only have microbes in them. So let's invest more than $10 billion in the search for microbes. So currently the plan is to build the Habitable World Observatory that will search for the molecular fingerprints of microbes in the atmospheres of exoplanets. Now, we may find those molecular fingerprints like oxygen, methane, water, but they could still be produced by geological processes. It will be a very difficult task to absolutely make sure that there are microbes on those distant planets. However, if we discover a technological signature, it might be much easier to verify that it's not natural. If we find a gadget it would close to Earth, it will give us evidence for not only life, but intelligence. And I find that far more exciting to find evidence for intelligence because we can learn from it. And whereas I'm not that excited by microbes. I should also mention that interstellar objects give us a rare opportunity that was not recognized by the scientific community. Because, it's one thing to search for molecular fingerprints of microbes in the atmospheres of exoplanets far away. But even if we have a rock from another star arriving as an interstellar object, we can design a mission that would land on it, just like the OSIRIS-REx mission that NASA launched that landed on the asteroid Bennu and delivered 120 grams of its materials to Earth. And these materials were analyzed over the past year. And guess what? We found in laboratories on Earth, we found that they contain most of the amino acids that give rise to life as we know it. They were on this asteroid Bennu. And I would like to know, if we land on an interstellar rock, even if it's not technological, just a rock, and we retrieve 100 grams of material from there, what kind of building blocks do we find there? Are they the same as the building blocks of life as we know it, or maybe life as we don't know it? And that's a direct way of learning something about the material around distant stars without needing to go there, because these rocks made already the trip. It took them billions of years to arrive to our backyard. And I think that's a completely new frontier that was not recognized as of yet in the search for life around other stars. Just examine the materials carried by interstellar rocks to figure out what might lie around other stars. That's not recognized by the astronomy community. And I would think that is a fantastic way to actually get a first-hand experience with materials from far away. And we should take advantage of that.
I presume, I remember in 2018, I was reading articles about how Oumuamua was slightly changing acceleration that couldn't be explained by gravity alone. And I presume some of the people who are attacking you today, their explanation was, this is just outgassing. This is the tiny thrusters on a comet. That's what's making them change.
No,
but Oumuamua showed no visible comet light
Right.
tail.
Exactly. And if you do the calculation, if you do the math, you realize that to explain the non-gravitational acceleration, about 10%, a tenth of the mass of Oumuamua had to be ablated. That's a significant fraction. I'm not talking about a tiny fraction, like I said before, a millimeter thick layer of the 20-kilometer 3I Atlas would need to be ablated to explain the glow around it over 6 months. Okay, that's it. Just 1 millimeter. Here, you have to ablate 10% of the size of Oumuamua in order to end up with the kind of acceleration that it exhibited. And that's a lot. So where is this material? We haven't seen it. And my colleagues say, maybe it's invisible. Maybe it's a dark comet. And that reminds me of Hans Christian Andersen's tale, where the adults in the room tell the kid, the emperor has
There's
clothes,
no clothes.
You just can't see it. The kid says, I don't see any clothes.
Yeah.
And they say, well, they are invisible. Again, I play the role of the kid. I just respond to what I see. And my colleagues are saying, well, maybe the cometary tail is invisible. Now, for the mainstream comet experts to argue that this explains Oumuamua, the fact that it has something you can't see, when all other comets that we have ever studied obviously have a lot of evaporation that you can see. For them to argue that and explain, let's put it under the carpet of traditional thinking and move on, that's disingenuous, because they should admit that it's really paradoxical that if this is a rock made of hydrogen, nitrogen, or a dust bunny, or some other type of materials, it's anomalous. Let's all admit that, instead of saying we can explain it in a conventional way. And why would we consider a technological origin? Well, why would we? Because 3 years later, the same telescope discovered an object pushed by sunlight, and it was technological. We produced it because there is a whole class of objects around Earth that I just realized exist this year, and it's called empty trash bag objects. These are objects pushed by sunlight. They have no evaporation. And of course, in that case, people say, well, these are fragments, broken pieces from satellites. Fine, we know that near Earth there were pieces of satellites that were broken off, and they may be these empty trash bag objects pushed by sunlight. But given that, why would we dismiss the hypothesis that Oumuamua is also an object behaving in the same way? And if it is, then it must be technological in origin. Maybe it's a surface layer of a bigger object that was torn apart and is just pushed by sunlight. So for some reason, that was completely dismissed. We know of objects that behave just like it, that were technological in origin.
Loving this interview? We have 17 seasons of content just like this, plus part 2 of every episode, all ad-free for Veritas Plus members. Become a member today at veritas7.com.
Yet, comet experts would argue it's a speculation that shouldn't be entertained, and in fact, they ridicule whoever thinks about it. And, with respect to the technological origin of 3I Atlas, a professor at Oxford just recently commented, Chris Lintott, he said, considering the technological possibility is nonsense on stilts and an insult to everyone that works hard to understand this object. And this person simply does not understand how science is done, because he was born when I started practicing astrophysics, and he doesn't understand it because in science you are allowed to put any conjecture, any hypothesis on the table. There shouldn't be any censorship. He cannot say this is nonsense because he needs to look at the data and explain why he can rule out that possibility. And if he cannot rule out that possibility, it should be on the table. And as more data comes in, we can decide whether, which interpretation is the correct one. But it's all within the scientific method. And just think about, a subject that occupied the minds of the mainstream of astronomy for 40 years. It's the nature of matter in the universe. 85% of the matter is unknown. It's a substance. We don't know what it is. And it makes up 6 times more matter than ordinary matter that we are made of. It's invisible. And the question is, what is it, this dark matter? And, the mainstream science suggested various explanations. For example, the most popular one, when I started astrophysics, and everyone said that makes a lot of sense, is a supersymmetric particle that is weakly interacting. And supersymmetry is the new symmetry of nature. And everyone said, that makes a lot of sense. In fact, it's obvious that supersymmetry exists, and it's very likely that such a particle exists. And guess what? The Large Hadron Collider went to search for supersymmetry in the most natural range of parameters and ruled it out. It's not there. And people within the mainstream received a lot of honors, awards, and flattered each other and said how great this idea is, but it doesn't describe nature. So now you say, okay, what should be the outcome of such an experience? The mainstream should be a little more humble in the sense of, if we don't know what dark matter is and we invested billions of dollars in searching for specific examples that will explain it, and we were wrong about that, then when you see anomalies of an object in the sky and they are deviations from the way rocks behave, then considering a technological origin should be left on the table and should not be dismissed because the same mainstream advocates were wrong before. Okay, so it's not as if they have a perfect record. We spent billions of dollars studying ideas that were popular among them, and they turned out to be wrong because science is a learning experience. We can't really imagine things that nature gives us, and therefore we should leave all possibilities on the table and then try to search for the evidence that would rule them out one by one until one of them is left. And, it's really important to leave the possibilities on the table, because if you are saying, I know it's a comet, forget about it, we don't even need to observe it, then, your ignorance will be maintained. You will not seek the evidence. And one thing I'm trying to do is, by making this claim about Three-Eye Atlas, even though I'm only 40% confident that it might be technological, I make this claim so that observers will get as much data as possible to prove me wrong. Because the worst we can do is not have enough data. But if we have a lot of data, if it turns out that it's technological, nobody would be able to shove it under the carpet of traditional thinking. That's what the Vatican would have concluded if they were to look through telescopes instead of putting Galileo in house arrest. So it's a human weakness to actually guess the answer, pretend that you are the adult in the room, and ridicule whoever says otherwise.
But to the average person, we're thinking, in less than a decade, we're seeing the first 3 interstellar objects approaching. And some might argue that interstellar objects like the 3 we're discussing are only being detected now because we finally have powerful modern telescopes. How much of these recent discoveries is due to better technology versus an actual increase in such objects entering our solar system?
Oh, no, it's just better technology. And the reason we are doing it, again, don't take for granted that scientists would seek evidence. They would seek evidence just if they are either instructed to do that or are trying to prove something. Okay, that's the only reason that scientists would seek evidence. And very often, if they say, I don't want to spend my time seeking the evidence, they remain ignorant. And that happened many times before. I give you one example. There was a paper by an astronomer called Otto Struve, who suggested to search for Jupiter mass planets in close proximity to stars like the sun. And he showed that in 1952 in a paper that it would be feasible to do that. But observers said, we don't expect Jupiter mass planets to be so close to a sun-like star. We see Jupiter far from the sun, and we understand why it is. We will not waste our time searching for that. So they didn't seek the evidence. And guess what? In 1995, more than 40 years after his paper, by chance, some astronomers discovered, 2 astronomers discovered a Jupiter mass planet in close proximity to a sun-like star. And they got the Nobel Prize for it. If you look at their paper, they do not reference Otto Struve's paper from more than 40 years earlier, 1952. So his proposal was ignored, dismissed. People were not seeking the evidence for 40 years. And when they seek the evidence, they suddenly found a planet that gave them the Nobel Prize. What is the lesson from that? That the efficiency of discoveries depends on how open-minded the scientists are. Because if they say in advance they don't want to seek the evidence because there is a small chance of finding something, they will not find this something. And so when people dismiss a technological origin for space objects, they will not find that it's technological, because it would be ignorance being maintained by the lack of data. Okay. And that's my main concern, that if we don't get enough data, we won't find the evidence. Coming back to your question, if you can remind me what the original was.
No, basically, when we have these objects, 3 of them in less than a decade.
Yes, I wanted to give the historical context. Yeah. So in 2005, the Congress issued a task to NASA to find more than 90% of all objects bigger than 140 meters, the size of a football field, because they can cause a large damage to cities around the world. And we know the lesson from the dinosaurs. We don't want to suffer from an impact of an asteroid. So we want to know about near-Earth objects bigger than that. And so that led directly to the Pan-STARRS Observatory in Hawaii that started searching for such objects. One of them was Oumuamua. It was flagged because it's a near-Earth object, came close to Earth. And then they realized, oh, wait a minute, this one moves too fast to be bound to the sun. It's actually interstellar. That's how Oumuamua was discovered, the first interstellar object, just by chance, because it passed close to Earth. And this Pan-STARRS telescope was tasked to find near-Earth objects of its size. Okay, so they found it. And after that, Borisov was found because it was a comet, and it was big enough for an amateur astronomer, Gennady Borisov, to discover it. And he was already aware of Oumuamua. So, that came after Oumuamua. And now, the Atlas survey was also surveying the sky with the same objective of looking for objects that might be near Earth. And, the main facility in the coming decade will be the Rubin Observatory in Chile, which was the follow-up to the Pan-STARRS Observatory. It's much bigger, much more sensitive, 8.4 meters in diameter. And it will employ a camera with 3.2 gigapixels, 1,000 times more pixels than your cell phone camera. And it will survey the southern sky every 4 days. It was inaugurated in June 2025, a few weeks before 3I Atlas was discovered. And there is an irony here, because 3I Atlas was discovered by a 0.5 meter telescope, much smaller telescope, that was a neighbor of Rubin, the Rubin Observatory. It's just next to it in Chile, and it scooped it. And in fact, the Rubin team went back in time to early June, and they could see 3I Atlas in their images, but they just started to monitor the sky around that time, and they haven't paid too much attention to this object. And so now we know about 3I Atlas, but in the next decade, the Rubin Observatory will find a new interstellar object every few months. That's the expectation based on its amazing sensitivity. And I think that it brings a new era to astronomy, because the detection rate is 100 times bigger than it was in the past. Over the past decade, we found 3, and now we would find 1 every few months. So we're talking about an increase by orders of magnitude. And that means that, I think we should examine and check each and every new interstellar object, because it may well be that one of them is not a rock, maybe technological, and if it happens to be the case with 3I Atlas or any future object, there will be an immediate question of what to do about it, because it will be like a visitor to our backyard, and it's very different than getting a radio signal from thousands of light years away, where you have the leisure of taking your time, how to respond, and not worrying about a visit, because the source of that signal is so far away. But when you have a visitor in your backyard that could come to the front door and get into your home, you need to decide immediately what to do about it. And I think there should be an organization that includes policymakers to decide about that. And, we worry a lot about existential threats from artificial intelligence, from climate change, from an asteroid impact. But there was no discussion in the past about the threat from alien technology. And the fundamental question there is, if you see something, is it friendly or is
foe,
it hostile? Yeah. And, the implications are huge. And, I make the comparison with Pascal's wager. So Blaise Pascal, a French mathematician and philosopher, argued that we should take seriously the notion of God. And the argument was that if God exists, it would have a huge implication to our life. And therefore, we must take it into consideration. And I say the same thing about alien technology. If it exists, it would change the future of humanity, and therefore we cannot ignore that possibility.
Well, isn't that the agnostic way? Just don't close your mind, just be prepared. And all the militaries in the world, and I am not a warmonger, but when it comes to this, I would think that they must have a secret plan, at least, out there in the event of such occurrence happening.
Yeah, so one way to think about the Three-Eye Atlas is in the context of the dark forest hypothesis, which is a solution to the paradox that Enrico Fermi raised. He had lunch in 1950 in Los Alamos and talked with colleagues, physicists, about extraterrestrials. And he asked the question, where is everybody? If they are out there, why don't we see them? And of course, one solution is they remain silent as a strategy to avoid being destroyed by predators. Those that survive are the ones that you won't notice. It's just like being in a dark forest where you worry about the animals that are stronger than you are. So that doesn't mean that they're not listening. And we've been broadcasting for more than 100 years without any thought, if they are not far from us, they know about us for 100 years. And if they monitor the technological development of humanity, at some point they might say, okay, this is a young technological civilization. They're starting to get better and better, and they might pose a threat to us. So let's send a reconnaissance mission that will survey what's going on there, or do something else. And, that could be the origin of Three-Eye Atlas.
I remember the novel, The Dark Forest, and a few things. Every civilization is silent. It's a silent hunter with a gun. You can't know others' intentions and resources are finite, and revealing your location could invite destruction from a more advanced civilization that sees you as a potential threat. And it reminds me of Professor Michio Kaku, who says, if ET phones us, we shouldn't phone back. Where do you stand with that?
Well, that's a great question. I actually wrote an essay just a few days ago. Should we message Three-Eye Atlas? Because it will move at nearly 100 kilometers per second relative to Earth. When it will pass close to the sun, we won't be able to launch rockets that would intercept it from Earth, because that's more than 3 times the maximum speed that our rockets can achieve. And so we won't be able to intercept it. But its speed would be still about 3,000 times smaller than the speed of light. And therefore, if we can transmit a light signal to it and engage with it, and that signal will reach it. And then the question is, what kind of a message should we beam in its direction? A reporter was asking me that, and I said, well, a simple message might be, hello, welcome to our cosmic neighborhood, peace. Just to open the conversation. But the fundamental question is, what kind of a language to use, and whether they will be able to understand it. And of course, one can use a Morse code or some language that is easy to decode if they have artificial intelligence or some computational capabilities to figure it out. But then there is also the concern that, if the dark forest hypothesis is correct, that when we engage with them, they might become hostile. And so it's a matter of policy as to what we need to do. And my recommendation, since it represents a blind date of interstellar proportions, my best advice for a blind date is to first observe the other side before expressing an opinion, before deciding how to engage with it. Many young people don't do that. They keep talking and they don't actually observe the other side on a blind date. But this is my advice. And, once we collect enough data on the other side, we might have a better approach to engage with it. This is something that we need to think about. But frankly, we don't have a lot of time with Three-Eye Atlas. My hope is that it will become obvious that it is a comet once it gets closer to the sun, and we will see a beautiful cometary tail around it. That will resolve all the concerns that I have. But if it turns out not to be a comet, all these questions will come to the forefront, and we have to deal with that and be open about it. And of course, there is the whole subject of unidentified anomalous phenomena near Earth that is being discussed quite broadly within the intelligence community in the US. And I gave a briefing to Congress on May 1st, 2025, about the work of the Galileo project that I'm leading. We are now assembling 3 observatories that will give us data on millions of objects every year that we will analyze with machine learning software and try to find unfamiliar objects. We will also try to measure the distances to these objects by the method of triangulation. And hopefully, we will know more within a year or 2.
Professor, we have to take a one and only break, but let me just say this, because I'll be focused like a laser beam on your statistics, the 40% technological. If every few weeks you start changing that to 41, 42, 43, then the question in my mind will be, do they come in peace? And we'll discuss that when we come back. How can people learn more about your work? I know you have some books as well.
Yeah, I have written 8 books, but many of them are textbooks. But the last 2 that are popular level are Extraterrestrial and Interstellar. Extraterrestrial became a bestseller. In addition to that, I write an essay every day or 2 on medium.com, so you can follow up on updates related to my research. And I have also a professional website at Harvard University where you can find videos from my interviews or links to my scientific papers.
Wonderful. One more hour to come with Professor Avi Loeb. This is Mel Hostelrick, and you are listening to Veritas, The Truth. We'll be right back. Here's a track from Truth Frequency. You won't hear anywhere else. If you like what you hear, you can get the full track at veritas7.com on the page for today's guest.
Some arrivals don't knock. They enter history without permission. No greetings, no warnings, just motion and momentum. 3 hiatus is one of them. "60 kilometers per second. Its trajectory points back to the galactic core. Not a comet, not a rock, a traveler, silent, deliberate. It doesn't glow, it doesn't shed. It simply turns precisely, without cause. Sometimes silence is a signal. We've seen 2 before. Oumuamua, Borisov. This one is different. The brightness pulses irregularly. The spin resembles intent. No gas, no tail, but it moves like choreography. Could it be controlled? A message was heard from Chile, decoded by machine. Hello friends, we watch Earth. Hang tight friends. Twice spoken, simple, deliberate. A reply to our own broadcast. November is our window. Closest approach, short, final. What we learn may define the century or be lost forever. Hang tight, friend.
Thank you for listening to the first part of this important Veritas episode. To hear the rest and access all of our exclusive content, head over to the Veritas Plus member section or click the subscribe button at veritas7.com. While you're there, don't forget to visit the Veritas store, featuring a range of great products, including Focus Life Force Energy. Experience the benefits with a 15-day free trial of FLFE, no credit card required. Want to get in touch? Be a guest on the program? Suggest someone or share feedback? Just click the contact button at veritas7.com. Thank you for listening to Veritas, because you don't want to believe, you want to know.